Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have made a shaker card to share with you, and it's going back to what I originally started this channel with, shrink plastic shaker cards. So today I'm making this adorable ocean theme card. I'm using a bunch of old Lawn Fawn ocean themed stamp sets, some shrink plastic. This is the brand I used this time. I do have a couple, but I'm just making my way through this stuff at the moment. And the one I'm using is clear on both sides. Some are textured, but this one just happens to be clear. I'm using my black Stays On ink. Now this is the only ink that I have ever found to work when doing this. It is very intense. It stains almost immediately. It doesn't matter how fast you try to rub it off, which is a little bit of a shame because I like my stamps to stay as clear and beautiful as I possibly can keep them for as long as I can. So it's almost like a bit of a sacrifice when you use this stuff and it just instantly stains them. But it doesn't affect the way they can be used. They still work perfectly. So here I am just stamping out my images. I stamp all of my little sea creatures twice. At this point I didn't know what my layout was really going to be, but I knew I wanted multiples of my images and it was just easier to get it done all at the beginning. Once I had finished stamping out all these cute little creatures, I then, because they're the little sets and I tend to collect the matching dies for these ones, I then cut them out with their dies. It is much easier to use dies on this shrink plastic than it is to cut them out by hand. I find because the plastic is so thick, when you're using your scissors and trying to maneuver around those little limbs and pieces to these creatures, sometimes the plastic bends and that still shows up even after it's been heated and shrunk. So here they all are cut out nicely, except the seahorses. I did have to do them by hand and thank goodness they were a fairly simple shape. So here I'm colouring in, and there's really not much point to me showing much of this colouring in because it's clear and the colours show up really pale on this, and it's something to remember when doing shrink plastic is that no matter what colour you put on to your plastic before you shrink it, it's going to get darker as it shrinks. I'm not sure of the science behind it. I'm not sure if it's something to do with the heat. I like to think that it is because you're colouring in on a surface and it shrinks, that maybe or the ink has to shrink down and piles on top of itself and gets darker. I'm really not sure how it works. But it is something to keep in mind, especially if you've got a colour scheme going, because these are going to turn out very different to the colours that I'm using to colour them in. I should have left the sound in for this. I'll see if I can find a bit. It sounded so funny, especially doing that many images. Anyway, I'm going to skip the rest of this colouring because it's just too hard to see and there's really not much to look here. Let's go straight to shrinking these. So I use my craft mat on my table. I use a heatproof mat underneath that from my kitchen. Then I have a plate on top of that because everything here gets very, very hot, especially since I'm doing so many of these little creatures. I find that sometimes they actually get so hot they stick to the plate. So that's why I'm not pinning it down to heat it, which would kind of make a bit more sense to do that because they do just keep flying away, and I know it probably is very frustrating to watch that. But if I hold them down too much, they just get stuck, and then the ink from my pens actually stains my plates forever. So that is why you will see me trying to hold them and them flying all over the place. So that is the size difference between the one that hasn't been shrunk and the one I have just shrunk. It is ridiculous. They're so cute. I am still getting the hang of this. I've done a few of these cards now. I feel like with a bit more practice I'm going to be able to get better results. I find that they do, to a degree, like the image kind of stretches or bends depending on the way maybe that I'm holding them with the tweezers, or when I'm trying to flatten them so that they're not so curved so that they'll fit in my shaker windows. It just depends. Sometimes they turn out perfect and other times they look a little bit warped, but they're all adorable. There's no denying that. They're all really, really cute. And there they are, all with the original sized ones and the ones that I have shrunk. Adorable. I'm just going to let this run out now and you can just watch things shrink down because it's one of those things that I find oddly satisfying. I'll leave you with some music. So what you can see here is what I very quickly ripped up in my Cricut design space. It's just a rectangle with a couple of circles attached to it to make them kind of look like bubbles. It reminds me of the little stamps that Fawn includes with their ocean sets. Those tiny little bubbles bundled up together. So this took about 20 seconds to whip up in design space, and then I set my Cricut to cut it out. And if you've been watching my videos lately, you know I have a thing for rounding the corners on my card fronts, so that's what I'm doing here. Today I'm going to be inking up directly onto my card base. I don't usually do this, but I'm a bit low on white cardstock and it doesn't fit in the budget anytime soon, so I'm finding ways to work around that. Here I am just marking out a couple of dots with my erasable pen so that I have a fair idea of where I need to ink up, and then I'm going to erase them straight away. They kind of leave a little indentation in the cardstock because I'd pressed hard enough, so I have a fair idea of where I need to ink up. For this at the moment, I'm just using the excess pink and purple ink on my brushes. So it's probably mostly seedless preserves on my purple brush and a mix of all the other colours that are on there as well. Now, because this card front is a pale greenish blue, it doesn't really tie in with the pink and purple yet. So I'm going to do some splatters over the top in some pink just to, I guess, tie it all together a little bit. I love this pink. I love every colour in this set. They're all so super sparkly. I haven't had a chance to use the yellow and green yet. Maybe that should be one of my goals soon, is to use those bright colours too, because they're all so beautiful. I'm then going to go over it again with just a little bit of blue, and then of course the white gold. And I am so glad that this set and my Starry set both contain white gold, because it's the one that I use the most. Once that's done, I set that aside, and now I'm going to work out how I'm going to add dimension to this so that there is enough room for my shaker elements to move freely. So this is some kids craft foam, and I love that it's adhesive on one side because, as you just saw, I very easily doubled this just by taking the backing off one side, and now that they're stuck together, it's super thick. So I'm just cutting some strips to fit around the very edges of the back of my card front. I'm going to be able to very easily stick this stuff down because I've left one of the sticky sides free. I didn't put both sticky sides together. Before I get adhering that though, I need to use some acetate for my little windows. So I'm low on acetate too. I need to do like a stock up on the basics at the moment. I need more card bases, more acetate, more white cardstock, just the boring things. You know, I'd rather spend money on cute stamps, but I can't use my stamps if I don't have the basics to get through my card making. So I'm being super stingy with my acetate here, cutting around all the bits that I don't need to waste. I'm going to adhere that just with some PVA glue and give that some time to dry. And now it's time for these foam pieces. Now it's going to look like a bit of a Franken card by the time I'm finished with it here, because I cut a lot of little pieces to fit around these bubbles. If this card was going to have glitter or really fine elements, I would probably have done what I do with some of my other cards, which is just keep layering the piece that has my windows in it over and over and over again, so that it creates these perfect pockets that I can run glue around the edges so that nothing gets in there. But because my shrink plastic pieces are so chunky, there's not really a risk that they're going to slip between things. They're all really big. So I can relax a little bit with the way that I do this foam and just, I guess, roughly put these down around the circles without having to close in every single gap. So as you can see with that shake, everything's going to be okay, even though there's a few little gaps and things aren't sealed completely. It's going to be alright. So here I am just adding some double-sided tape to all of this foam. And I do quite a lot of it. I do like to cover up as much as I can so that it adheres really well to my card base. As much as I liked this ink blending that I did before on my card bases, I thought I'd mix it up a little bit. I added some blue to one side, and then I decided to just add a bit of water and kind of blend them out in a bit of a watercolorish way. I actually preferred this in the end. It was a bit of a different look. I don't know how much it suited this card specifically, but it's something to keep in mind later, that I can ink blend and then go over it to give it a bit of a different look. This is the point where I loaded up my little shaker windows with some anti-static powder, and I ran it all the way around the very edges in hopes that this will ensure everything's nice and slippery and not static when I add all of my little shaker pieces. Because we all probably know by now how incredibly frustrating I find it when you shake it and on the first shake something finds its forever home stuck in the side. So here I am just playing around with where I think I'm going to put all these little pieces. And then I have a huge packet of these tiny little diamonds that I got online, and I'm adding some of them as well. Once I had mapped everything out, I still felt like this felt a little bit bare, so I'm going to add some bubbles and some coral to my little windows. I don't know, again, if this was a good idea or a bad idea. I didn't mind them the way that I had stamped them on, but then I decided to go over them with water. And it was one of those cards, like I said, I hadn't planned it out very well. I kind of just went for it, and that does work sometimes. But then sometimes I feel like I get a bit carried away. And once I had put water on these, it was the point of no return. So I just decided to work with what I'd done. Although this didn't turn out perfectly, I do like it a little bit. There's something about it that I quite like. So now I have put all of my little shaker elements onto their decorated little window bubbly bits. I'm going to remove the backing to my double-sided tape and stick it down. It was then time to come up with a sentiment for this card. So I really like the sentiment, "I see it's your birthday," from the little seahorse set. So I thought I would use that sentiment, but for the word see, I'm going to use some lawn fawn dyes to emphasize that a bit. And using the same colours that I used in the card, I'm using some peacock feathers and some seedless preserves, watered down to paint the letters. I then added some sparkle to this because I can't help it. I then also cut the same letters in black cardstock just so that I could layer these and offset them a little bit to give it a bit of shadow so that it wouldn't blend into the cardstock on my card front. Here I am just measuring everything out before I start stamping the sentiment. As with all of my embossed sentiments, I load up my little bit of cardstock with heaps of anti-static powder before using my embossing ink and my embossing powder. And here I have made sure I blocked out the I, so it's just going to stamp "It's your birthday," and then I can add the I after I measure out the correct space for the word see. Once the embossed parts of my sentiments were dry and I knew I wasn't going to get them all smudged, I then glued on the letters for the word see. I love doing this with sentiments. I always forget that just because there's a sentiment doesn't mean you have to stamp it just as it is. You can decorate it, you can make words bigger. There's so many more things we can do with them. The pun's already thought of, it's just up to us to get creative with it. It was now time to pick some images to decorate the front of this card. As cute as the bubbles were, I felt it was very plain and needed just something around it. So I'm using a bunch of, again, ocean stamp sets. And then I'm going to stamp them onto some white cardstock and colour them in with a mix of alcohol markers and Copic markers. Once all my images were coloured and had their little white details on them, I then used some double-sided foam squares on some of my images to give them a bit more dimension on the front of this card. Once everything was stuck down, this card was complete. I hope you love it. I love shrink plastic shaker cards. They are so much fun. Make sure you give them a go. They're really not that tricky and the result is really, really cute. If you like this card, please give it a thumbs up and please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be back again soon with some more crafty tutorials. Bye for now.